Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video I'm going to talk about the effects of barrel aging on a spirit and do a review of the Arran Barrel Reserve Single Malt Scotch Whisky. So, the name Barrel Reserve, it seems to imply two things. One, that barrels are particularly important to this whiskey, as opposed to what? Aging it in a plastic bag? All Scotch whiskey has to be aged for at least 3 years in a barrel. And then reserve. Reserve has no legal status in whiskey. In wine, it does in some regions, depending on where you're at. In Spain, for example, reserve or reserva has a particular classification, or Grand Reserve, Grand Reserva. In California, Grand Reserve or Reserve doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any legal status. It's just a sort of a branding or gimmicky advertising means of getting you to think something extra special about the wine. Well, could be the same thing here. The Reserve doesn't necessarily mean anything that, that extra special barrels as opposed to any other barrels. So, but they call it a barrel reserve. So, gotta assume must be a particular emphasis on the barrels. So I thought, you know what? In reviewing this whiskey, let's take a little bit of a look at the importance of barrels. What do barrels do? What do they add to and subtract from a new make spirit? An introduction to barrel aging. The primary characteristics of a Scotch malt whiskey are derived from the base ingredients, which include the source of the water, the varietal of barley, and the land and climate in which it is grown. The secondary characteristics of a Scotch malt whiskey are derived from the spirit making process, which includes whether or not the barley is peated, the types of yeast used for fermentation, the size and shape of the stills, the speed of distillation, the amount of times the spirit is distilled, the amount of copper contact, whether it goes through a worm tub or shell and tube condenser, and how the cuts are made at the spirit bank. The tertiary characteristics of a Scotch malt whiskey are derived from the spirit maturation process in oak casks, which include the type of oak, whether it is Quercus alba, Quercus robur, or Quercus petraea, the quality of the oak, virgin, first fill, or second fill, the time spent in oak, a minimum of 3 years for Scotch whiskey, the climate in which the spirit is matured, and the type of warehouse, whether dunnage or rack warehouse, the casks lie in. Maturing new make spirit in oak casks achieves two effects. First, it removes unwanted elements. The oak cask breathes and allows micro amounts of oxygen in very slowly. This reduces the ethanol content, which removes the harsh rubbing alcohol taste of the spirits. Young whiskeys can have a bite even at 40 ABV, while an 18-year-old whiskey at 48% alcohol by volume can have very little or no bite at all. The second effect that a cask has on new make spirit is it adds additional flavors from the wood. Numerous spices, particularly vanilla, are native to the oak, and if the cask previously contained bourbon, sherry, red wine, or rum, all those will add flavors to the spirit as well. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of a whiskey's character comes from its aging process. Depending on the quality of the cask, the type of cask, the previous contents of the cask, and the amount of time the spirit is spent in the cask will determine how much effect the cask has on the whiskey. Arran Barrel Reserve Single Malt Scotch Whisky. It's aged 100% in ex-bourbon barrels. It's a non-age statement. It has a natural color. It's bottled at 43% alcohol by volume and sells for anywhere between $49 and $67. So this is a non-age statement whiskey. Don't know how old it is. However, it does come across very, very, very young. It doesn't have any of the new making characteristics which I don't like that aspartame, powdered sugar, false sweetness. It doesn't have any of that. It doesn't have any of those sort of green new making characteristics. It's actually quite nice on the nose. You get apples and pears. It has a nice floral note. A little bit of lemon. It's got some barrel spice going on there. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, those kind of characteristics. Perhaps a little bit of canned pineapple, or if you've ever had just drink the juice from a canned pineapple, I like that. On the palate, however, is where it really shows its youth. It's sweet up front, sweet all the way through. Sweet, sweet, sweet. It is very sharp. It has a bite to it, and yet it's only 43% alcohol by volume. Like I stated in the video, in that clip there on barrels, a young spirit can have a sharpness to it, even if it's at a lower ABV. So if we age this for another 15, 20 years, that bite would be reduced. Now there are basically 3 different types of bite you can get. One, obviously an alcohol bite. You can get a bite from the youth of a spirit, but you can also get a bite from spice notes. And alcohol and spice, when they're combined, I'm talking particularly pepper spice, not baking spices, but pepper. Any pepper-like spice, and when combined with alcohol, can intensify the bite of the spice. So if you taste enough whiskeys, you can start to tell the difference between a high ABV bite, a spice bite, and a youth bite. And this definitely has a youth bite. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. That bite can also come across as sort of the bite of acidity. It's not acidity, but can come across like it. So if you think of high acid wine, like a Sauvignon Blanc, or perhaps some Chardonnay from a cold region, something like that, you get a nice crisp acidity to the wine. You get a similar experience with this whiskey, but it's the youth of the alcohol. It's not acidity, but someone might interpret it as acidity, and or also sort of a crispness to the whiskey. Everything I get on the nose is confirmed. Apple, pear, a little bit of that sort of pineapple juice going on in there. On the back end, I get the barrel notes in there, baking spices, like vanilla, cardamom, hints of cinnamon. It's actually quite nice. This is, I would say, definitely a barrel forward whiskey, as opposed to being a youth forward, or I would say spirit forward, in which you get a lot of the spirit characteristics. So it does come across as young. It doesn't have that sort of that bite from the alcohol youth, but not with the new making characteristics, which I don't like. It does have a nice barrel characteristics on the back end. It is somewhat sweet. It's not real intense. The transitions aren't huge. And the finish, the length of the finish is, I would say, moderate. It's not short, it's not long, it's moderate. So it's a nice whiskey. Overall, I would say this is a nice, classic barrel, young barrel single malt Scotch. It does have a little bit of maltiness going on there as well. It's well balanced. It's got a nice delivery on it. And if you wanted to start off with Scotch, if you wanted to start somewhere new, you didn't have a lot of experience with it, because of the ABV level with it, because it's not in your face, this is a good place to start. It's fresh, it's lively, it's seemingly crisp, sort of like maybe like a California coastal Chardonnay, something like that. In fact, it does, now and more and more I think about it, does sort of have some Chardonnay characteristics to it. It's really, really nice. What would I give it in terms of a score? I'm gonna go solid 87, 88 points. It doesn't have enough depth and complexity or length of finish to get me over 90, but I think it's better than just okay. It's a really nice whiskey. All right, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you've not yet subscribed, would you like watching my videos? I would appreciate it if you would subscribe, ring the bell to be notified for when I go live or post a new video. And until next time, Slanjivad. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.